What's going on, everybody? It's live stream 37, and the topic of the hour is going to be some of the recent Supreme Court of the United States decisions that have come down the pipe. Hot topic that's going around the country. So I've got a pretty diverse panel tonight, to say the least, in terms of opinion. So I'm going to go around and start introducing everybody. First and foremost, no stranger to the live stream. We got Les at Pegasus Test. Pegasus Test is his YouTube channel. Be sure to check him out. He was a Marine in the early 90s, served in Desert Storm. And he's also the company commander of Bravo Company 1 Shepherd. So be sure to check him out in West Virginia, guys. Attend those training semesters. He's also a master of logistics, has his own logistics company, as well as Polaris Training and Simulations Division, tactical training. So, Les, thanks for jumping on tonight.
Glad to be here, Brent.
All right, and our usual villain, we got Michael. Michael is a friend of mine. He's served in the Marine Corps for 6 years. He typically comes on when we need that different perspective because it's no fun to punch at each other. We'd rather punch at somebody else. So thanks for jumping on tonight, Michael.
Thanks for having me.
All right, next we got my good buddy Chad. Chad and I served together in the United States Marine Corps. We deployed together with Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 23rd Marines in 2010, 2011 time frame to help him promise Afghanistan. Chad served in Operation Iraqi Freedom 1, which was the initial invasion, and he went back in OIF 2 to hook and jab in Fallujah. Chad is studying for his military doctorate degree, and he's a wealth of knowledge. Always a pleasure having you on. Thanks for coming on tonight, Chad.
Hey, don't forget my pronouns. Let's go, Brandon.
All right, next. The evil of the evilest villains. I know the viewers all love him. We got Micah making his comeback. And Micah is a buddy of mine. We served together in Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 4th Marines in OIF 1, the initial invasion. And then we served together again in OIF 2, in the Battle of Najaf and other illustrious Marine Corps hooking and jabbing in Iraq. Micah went on, he would serve a total of 5 combat tours, correct? Between Iraq and Afghanistan in different infantry battalions. Micah has gotten his law degree. He's a lawyer, and definitely no.
I have my Juris Doctorate of Law, which is a degree from the law school. I will be a lawyer when I pass the bar exam at the end of this month coming up.
All right, whatever. Close enough. Close enough for government work. So nonetheless, he's going to bring a interesting perspective, and I know there's going to be some fireworks tonight, and I know you all love him. So thanks for coming on tonight, brother.
Thanks for having me, and I look forward to Googling new things after reading the comment section.
Okay. Late, but he made it. Dr. Christopher Larson. We thought you were UA, brother. We were about to run UA wall. Doc is no stranger to live stream. He's a original founder of the 1 Shepherd Leadership Institute. He's a Army veteran, NCO. He served in Korea, 38th parallel, hooking and jabbing with the North Koreans from time to time in the 80s. And he's a wealth of knowledge. He's the original founder of the 1 Shepherd Leadership Institute, going 40 years strong. And he's an accomplished author. He's written many books on small unit tactics. So, Doc, better late than never. Thanks for jumping on tonight. And I might add that we thought you were scared because Micah was here, and that's why you were not coming on. All right, guys. That is our panel tonight. We might have some other dudes jump on, and I just want to preface this by saying that because we're going to have we got a whole host of personalities here, and I'm sure some fireworks are going to fly at some point. So I'm going to probably be doing more moderating than I'm going to be doing speaking. So with that being said, guys, there's 2 big ones that we're going to talk about tonight. I want to start with the guns. Okay. So one of the Supreme Court decisions that came down essentially struck down a New York law that said that essentially you have to prove a reason to be able to have your gun out in public to get a concealed carry license. So that was struck down. That's applicable to numerous states across the country. And that is topic number 1. Topic number 2 is another big one, obviously, and that's essentially the overturning of Roe v. Wade. So we'll start with the gun one first, guys. I'm going to open it up the floor and kick it over to Pegasus Test to kick this battle royale out.
Okay, first I want to clarify, I'm not a lawyer and I don't even play one on TV. Um, but obviously this is a big win for the 2A community. If you look back at a general 30,000 foot view, that since 1934, victories on the federal level have been few and far between. Really, the biggest one we've had was 2004, the repeal of the assault weapon ban. So this is a nice big win. We've codified the fact that, yeah, you are allowed to carry your firearm for self-protection. Quite the opposite of our friends to the north. I can only see good things coming out of this, despite all the doom and gloom that some of the blue state people who got affected by this are saying. I don't think New York City is going to turn into a Wild West shooting gallery, well, any more than it already is. And maybe it'll calm the hell down because they won't know who's out there packing. That's wishful thinking. I got nothing to back it up, but let's hope for the good stuff.
Yeah. The words that come to mind, well, what I've been thinking about kind of over the weekend is keeps coming back to me. A Few Good Men, Colonel Jessup, and his cross-examination says, you weakened a nation today. And that's sort of my thoughts with the two decisions. And looking at the New York case, essentially you had a law that was 107 years old that had been on the books, and essentially the court reversed that, took those rights away from the state, and then in the following up decision sent supposed rights back to the state and took them away from women across the nation. So the other word that just comes back to me is just hypocrisy, and that's what I'll be talking about, I guess.
Oh boy, is this going to be interesting. So we've seen two major victories from the Supreme Court, first being the gun issue, you stated. Hopefully New Yorkers can now have access to the means for self-defense. I would bet my next paycheck that if concealed handguns were more prevalent in places like New York and California, the crime rate would go down. However, I'm very pessimistic, and I don't think New York or California, for that matter, can be saved. As for abortion, I think this is another victory, not only for the propagation of our species, but for states' rights. Decentralized governance is the purpose of federalism. We have 50 states, 50 different governments, so just move where you're happiest. And all those crazy fuckers protesting in New York, Oregon, and California, why are you even protesting? You have access to abortions, and it's not going anywhere, so quit whining. You seem to be more upset that you can't cram your beliefs down the throats of the other half of the country. During COVID, you had plenty of people fleeing blue state dictatorships. If you live in a red state and covet abortion, feel free to go to a blue state. Take your Democrat vote with you, or better yet, go to Canada. Trudeau inserted himself into American politics earlier this week and said abortion would be safe in Canada. We'll be happy to see you go.
Well, you sent that message and your little pop-up box was in front of my microphone. So the gun decision, I hope I don't bore everyone to death, because there's really no way of getting into it without getting into like a constitutional law class and understanding what it is. Someone just said an enumerated right under the 14th are obligated. You're right. You're right. What does that mean? Then the Fifth Amendment mirrors the 14th Amendment, and due process is within those amendments. And to talk about due process, you have to understand what's called the levels of scrutiny. And I have a fun chart we can bring up later on. I don't want to overwhelm people. We'll bring it up later. We talked last time, we were in the Civil War one, we were talking about the Second Amendment right in D.C. versus Heller. Two cases, the court, states tried to pass a law prohibiting handguns. And the courts, they just straight up, you can't have a handgun in your home. They tried to say it was a militia. You had to be part of a militia was also one of the arguments. And what's crazy is, 1776 and whatnot is when we're founded. 2008 is the first time the Supreme Court said, yep, a a gun is a fundamental right independent of a militia, and you have a right to have one in your home for self-defense. Specifically, a handgun is a common use weapon in occurrence. Right now, I would say is a prime time for someone to take an AR challenge to the Supreme Court and cram it down their face even more, because the AR is a modern day musket. I'm tired of hearing the bullshit about nobody needs a weapon of war or whatever. And like, you know, I did go down a slippery slope last time because, like, you know, I don't want someone that knows nothing about this, just a moron, to go out and buy an AR-15 and live in an apartment and fucking have a home invasion and dump a 30-round mag through it. Like, that seems super irresponsible, but my uncomfortability with that can't trump, you know, like lawsuits, like comments. Like, hopefully there's a way around that. But it's the Second Amendment is a fundamental right, and I hope everyone acknowledges that. I'm going to say words tonight, and they mean very specific in certain things. So everyone's cheering right now because the 2A, and it's a fundamental right. Remember that word, fundamental right. That's very important. Actually, bring the chart up now. Bring the chart up now. Would you please, Brent? A fundamental right is subject. These are the levels of scrutiny on a means and ends test that the Supreme Court has to use. On the very top is the least demanding one. It's a rational basis test. If the government is only held to a rational basis test, they have to have a legitimate government interest and the law is rationally related. And if that's the case, it wins. Strict scrutiny, on the other hand, at the bottom is the most demanding one. And if it's a fundamental right, we apply strict scrutiny and the government almost always loses. All right, almost, it has to be necessary for a compelling government interest, national security, like something that's a very compelling interest. It has to be narrowly tailored for that specific, can't be over-inclusive or whatever. So you can bring that chart down now. So remember, that's a fundamental right. You apply that level of scrutiny. So I look forward to discussing. I feel like we should warm up round robin with the gun thing and then ease our way into the abortion thing, because it gets a little bit dicier.
All right. So I am on the abortion issue. I probably be a little more quiet. I have to stick to certain facts. Frankly, this is social media, and ironically, it is that one that would cause me the most heartache at work to speak freely. I'll speak my mind. I won't, censor myself, but to speak as freely as I want. So we'll get there. But the Second Amendment, the New York ruling and Bruin, no, I can talk openly about that. I am not a lawyer, not an attorney. And so I like to speak in, I guess, simple terms when it comes to this, because I'm not going to delve into, I'm willing to talk and discuss it, but I'm saying I don't have the reference to delve in and say, well, this is what this means and this is what that means. Here's what it means. I grab onto sound bites, if you will. That's a convenient term. Because 2008 DC versus Heller, there were some major sound bites in there. But I think the most critical for me, and I think that means for all of us, I'll argue, is the fact, yes, okay, could you outlaw handguns? No, you can't. And then the Supreme Court followed up a couple years later in Chicago and said, damn it, we said, no, you can't do that. And Chicago put up a big tissy fit and then still lost because SCOTUS came and said, no, man, it doesn't meet muster and is infringement on the Second Amendment. One of the chief arguments by Chicago and DC was that the Second Amendment is not an individual right, that somehow amongst the Bill of Rights, that the Second Amendment solely of all 10 was not an individual right. It was a collective right of the people, and therefore governed and ruled, and they could, basically abolish it if they wanted of the people. And what Heller comes and says in the consenting, what am I looking for? When they write things out, what they say were simply this: wrong. Human rights and the right to life, and thereby extension, the right to self-defense. Human rights are individual rights. They're not collective rights. They're not owned by a government. Government agencies don't have them. Corporate, security forces don't have them. Policing forces don't have them. Those are not, those agencies and those corporations do not enjoy human rights. Individual citizens enjoy human rights. And I think that's very interesting because they said, okay, so you have rights to firearms, period. And that includes handguns. And so DC and Chicago did a big boo-boo face. What's so important about New York City in the Bruen case is that, in my estimate, is that New York City said, yeah, we didn't say you couldn't have them. We didn't say you couldn't own them. We're not infringing upon their human right. We're saying you can't take them out of your house. And SCOTUS came and said, no, your human rights do not end at the threshold of your doorway. They do not end there. And so I think that's really a critical point.
All right, so I'm absolutely ecstatic about the New York ruling. Anytime a Second Amendment win is always a big plus in my book. Individual freedoms in terms of firearms. Man, I wish we could have machine guns sold at every convenience store. That's how pro 2A I am. So I'd be hard pressed for anybody to convince me otherwise. I'm all about American citizens possessing firearms for self-defense, being able to. Texas recently had a constitutional carry passed within the last year or two, and that's the way it should be, guys. And there's no wild west going on here in Texas right now because of that. There's plenty of states that have constitutional carry. I don't expect New York to obviously go that route, but they should, but they never will. But at the very least, I think their individual citizens should have that ability to obtain, at very minimum, a concealed handgun license. There's no reason why an individual citizen should not be able to, or should have to provide proof of why they need to provide self-defense when you have politicians and actors and everybody else, walking around with their bodyguards and whatnot. So I think it's just ridiculous. Double standard, one standard for the elites and then one standard for the normal people. So big win for the 2A community and the country, to be quite frank. So with that being said, I'm going to open up the floor. And then I actually want to kick it over to Michael because it seems like on topic 1, he's the only dissenter on this. So
can you hear me? All right. Yeah, so I do want to read something from George Will, who's a conservative columnist in the Washington Post, if you'll give me a moment. The title of his column is "The Supreme Court's Gun Ruling is a Serious Misfire." Thomas was right about the framers. However, he and the 5 justices who joined his opinion were wrong on Thursday in arguing that this improbability was essentially dispositive. The case involved a challenge to New York's 109-year-old law that required individuals seeking a license to carry firearms outside the home to demonstrate a proper cause for doing so. The Second Amendment is the only one in the Bill of Rights with a preamble. Quote, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The amendment was 217 years old before the court held that it protected the gun rights of individuals irrespective of membership in a militia. As Doc mentioned, actually, the 2008 case affirmed the right of individuals to keep an operative firearm in the home for self-defense. And Doc, it makes no mention of like human rights. It's speaking specifically to this 2A. However, about the right to bear firearms outside the home? The 2008 court insisted that this right is, like other constitutional rights, not unlimited and is compatible with long-standing regulatory measures such as forbidding firearms in sensitive places. So, and
Can I jump in on
hold
that?
on,
Because
let me,
I
sir,
read.
let me finish,
All right.
if I may, please. Um, Thomas, in his 63-page opinion, was characteristically meticulous and exhaustive in marshaling evidence of an enduring American tradition of permitting public carry of firearms by people with ordinary self-defense needs, and he found no American tradition that could justify New York's proper cause requirement. But in an amicus brief supporting New York, former federal appellate judge J. Michael Luttig, who is of a conservative judge that Senator Cruz, as well as John Eastman, clerked for, demonstrated that regarding the public carrying of loaded guns, there's an American tradition even older than the nation of striking a delicate balance between the Second Amendment's twin concerns for self-defense and public safety, unquote. The court's ruling, however, does not treat those as twin, meaning equal concerns. In these previous discussions, well, in the Uvalde, when we discussed the Uvalde shooting, that's been my argument, is that there's a balance between individual right versus public safety, and that's where I stand on this as well, is that it opens up essentially laws to where we have current gun laws that prevent felons from carrying them or from being on school campuses, ballparks, things of that nature. So essentially, this kind of opens it up where an individual could sue to say, like, hey, this is a violation of my Second Amendment rights. And I think the reason, it's reasonable for the government, whether it's state or federal, to put a limit on such possessions. Also,
You're
not an attorney.
you're right. I'm surprised they quoted it as accurately as they did. Clarence Thomas hit that, and he's 63. I'm on page 50. I haven't made it to the end yet, full disclosure. But what's interesting is he did not exactly use a strict scrutiny test, but he said, yeah, how we've done it is the history and tradition. And let me tell you something. The left, or whoever was writing I think it's the amicus brief. I should know what the name of which side it is. Whoever's writing in opposition or in support of the New York law, went back to like the 1200s, citing times. It was a history lesson reading the opinion. It was a history lesson. And they're like, this was not even close to being relevant to prevent knights from riding through towns with their horses in full armor and lances. And they said people still had personal daggers all the time. Not a big deal. The public danger, the dangers, the highly sensitive areas or whatever, that's historically been polling places, courthouses, and legislative bodies. It has, and what the New York legislature tried to do is say it applies the whole city of goddamn New York. It's a crowded, the whole thing is a public danger, and that's bullshit. That's absolutely bullshit. And I'm in one, because the other fun part about the brief is it says, and it should be taken as how the whole union does it. It's like 46 of the states have a shall issue, and there's 6. It's like Maryland, Hawaii, California, and some other liberal trash. Like, it's ridiculous. And that's the one. It's the whole union is on board. The whole union is on board. And when Doc's saying it's a human right, like, it's interesting he says that, because the opinions cite both these people bringing the challenging the action are law-abiding citizens that applied, and they showed there's crime. The crime spikes. They're showing a robbery down the road, and they're going to these arbitrary bodies, and they're like, a rising cry. You cannot. I felt that, like, in dangerous situations in California, where I'm like, I wish I had a fucking gun right now. And here's the other thing. There's this fucking scumbag piece of shit I know that lives here, where I'm not going to name drop or anything, but he's a big deal. He's mover and shaker, rubbing elbows with everybody. He has no fucking need for a concealed carry. Guess who got one signed off by the sheriff, buddy? It's an arbitrary fucking system where if you know people and you have some money, you can get, and that's bullshit too. So as a Californian, I can't wait. And as a law school graduate, I can't wait to apply for a fucking a permit to teach people CCW and maybe even open a business or something. I mean, it's just it's great to see it enumerated. But I want everyone, again, I'm going to say it again, I want everyone at this point in the conversation to recognize how important fundamental rights are. That make us feel all warm and fuzzy inside. It's a fundamental fucking right, all right? We're going to come back to that.
So I guess I'll throw my 2 cents in on this. You know, I don't think I have as much like Micah. I think the Roe case is more interesting, so I've got a lot more to say on that than I do this one. But I think New York City in particular, is a shithole, and I don't think there's little we can do to save it. So I think this 2A thing is kind of irrelevant. The government will find a way to skirt it. But for the sake of good TV, let me make an argument and argue one side. So here's the major problem with the Sullivan Act in New York, which is a century-old law that was challenged in the Supreme Court. The act essentially permits police departments to decide who can carry concealed, but only if proper cause can be shown. According to one article that I read, a concealed license in New York City, this is just the city, not the state, must meet one of 3 criteria. It can be issued to a business who transports cash or jewelry or a similar commodity. If there's a credible death threat, and it has to be deemed credible by the NYPD, and it's allowed for celebrities. So this goes back to what Brent was talking about. You know, rules for thee, but not for me. Another problem is, you know, no one really knows when they're going to be a victim of a crime. I have no idea if I go to my bank, if it's going to be robbed the day I'm actually there. So there's no way to know when a crime will occur. Now, you know, certainly there are people in bad situations, say a police informant or a woman who escapes an abusive marriage who can make a strong case. But what about the average Joe? And again, rules for me, but not for thee. So now the average Joe from New York, a state with a reputation for violent crime, I might add, can't have the means to defend himself, but a highly connected politician or businessman or even a fucking movie star can get a concealed permit. This creates a protected class in society, and that isn't what America is about. If the average citizen can't have guns and carry guns, okay, then let's disband the Secret Service and Capitol Police. Let's declare all state government buildings to be security-free zones. Then we'll see how long it takes our political class to change their fucking tune. If you don't get protection, if I don't get protection, neither do you.
Celebrities, all of them. I agree. And I'm so torn on this. Look, generally any win for human rights, and I see the Bill of Rights not granting a damn human right. Let me be very clear. It doesn't grant anything, but it does recognize them. And I see any win for the Second Amendment as a win for the right to life and the right to defend life, which is they're inherent of each other, and because of self-ownership. That's what separates an individual's right to life from an agency. Right? They don't have a human right because they're not a human. Now, they're made up of humans who, of course, possess human rights. But the agency itself is not. And so, okay. So I struggle. And here's my struggle with this win. The win is good. It's 98% good. The one thing that I think is kind of pathetic is that it was really fought over handguns. And handguns... I would much rather see us all carry bayonets or epee rapier swords or something useful like claw hammers, you know, something lethal. Because you got handguns, which really are ouchy when you're shot. I mean, they leave a serious boo-boo. It's probably not going to wash away. But as a weapon of self-defense, they're anemic. And we're fighting for the most anemic thing. Now, that would have been a cool Supreme Court ruling or finding or whatever outcome if we were talking about 155 howitzers. Man, freaking awesome.
So there's law on that, which is interesting because there was the standard that they have, since it's a fundamental right and they didn't use strict scrutiny, the standard that Thomas articulated. And I think this is something for everybody, because if we're going to talk about, you know, from Michael's side, like what does regulation look like going forward? They went and did a deep dive into the history. So there's still Thomas went as far as to admit it. I highlighted it, but it's fucking 60 pages long. I'd have to fish through it. He said that there's a history of prohibiting excessively dangerous weapons or something like that. So we're talking about cannons or cruiser, like something like that. And then there's also a history. So that's something that when you're talking about states bringing legislation, you're going to be able to get a crew served or like very dangerous weapons legislation will most likely be upheld as not an infringement. The other thing that there's a history of is using a weapon with the intention of being in a menacing manner, threatening manner, like somebody went into a church, like he was just presenting the weapon like in a harassing type manner. So we also need, and whether it's the Second Amendment, whether it's the First Amendment, because I know people are not happy about people protesting in front of the justice's house. So what you're saying is that you understand there's some restrictions on the First Amendment, that it's not absolute, that there might be something called time, place, and manner restrictions that the government can implement so people aren't protesting at 2 o'clock in the morning outside of your house. Like there are certain restrictions. So they talked about dangerous places. They talked about excessively dangerous weapons, using weapons in a threatening and menacing manner. So if the left is uncomfortable, stop talking about banning ARs and red flag laws and things that are just it's a waste of resources. It's divisive. It's a waste of resources. Let's talk about what it looks like going forward. Talk about how you can have, there's every state with the shall issue. They typically, if I'm not mistaken, someone correct me, at least California, there's some sort of additional class you have to participate in to get the CCW. There's like a requisite.
Yeah, it's usually a safety type class, which is more important. It's not a lot of states will require you to fire the handgun just to prove that you can generally put the bullet in the right direction. Here in Virginia, that's not even required because it's literally all about safety.
So, I mean, there might be something going forward that's not an infringement to be like, you need to spend a day shooting the goddamn gun. Or, something.
And SCOTUS allowed that. I mean, look, mental hospitals, prison. You're not going to carry your prison when you go see your sweetheart, carry your handgun when you go see your sweetheart in prison, okay? So there are inherently dangerous areas. And I think that that most of these make good sense. It's the sort of thing like when your mom said, don't stick your hand out the bus when you're going through a tunnel. And we all went, yeah, Mom, that's the first intelligent thing you said. So it's one of those things where we all just go, well, no kidding. Well, we're not going to bring our private owned firearms to the, violent criminals in prison. And you don't want to take them into schools. Hey, we need to harden the schools. We need good, effective response to the public menace of, mental health and not to treat them. I don't mean that like treat them as humiliate them, but I'm saying effective ways of dealing with this. And so maybe I think SCOTUS allows for all of that. What I didn't see is SCOTUS allowing for crew served weapons and howitzers. And my point is there aren't too many cabbies in the United States, taxi cabs, that got held up by a 3-man crew served MG-34. There's not too many schools that have been shot up by a 155 howitzer. So I don't understand the limitations of these things. And yet I do get why, emotionally, only emotionally, not logically. And certainly I'm not backing it, but I get why people who are deeply concerned, I don't care what side of the political spectrum you are, if you're deeply concerned about crime and violent crime, and you recognize that 75% of all violent crime involves a firearm, and that of those firearms, 97% involve a handgun because handguns are convenient and tiny and can be hidden and all these other things. I can see why people get, hey man, why are you loosening and restricting this on handguns? Yeah, I get that. I get it from an emotional point. But like I said, all said and done, this was a huge win for our human rights and the Second Amendment.
That was one other thing they had said, that there was some history in the legislation of the size of a barrel, like a really small, it was called a pocket pistol or something. There was some, oh man, this was really funny though. The left or the party supporting the law cited a case, and it was like King so-and-so, Louis IV or something like that. And when pistols came about, he banned them across the nation or whatever. And they're like, but upon further review of that, he did it because he thought pistols were incredibly unreliable and wanted his men to stay maintained on the longbow. I was like, that is hilarious. Like, he thought the longbow was much more lethal, and so it's like, it doesn't fit your purpose of public safety. It still has to fall, and that's somebody, in my opinion, that's somebody misusing case law, and it's not even good case. It's like, it was literally from 1206 or something, the cases they were trying to save for the history. And the history and tradition. And when you said it was a natural, that's where I was going. The guy asked when he was denied and said he lived in a high crime area or something like that. The court acknowledged that the founders, the intention, and you do need to take the history. You need to take the founders' intention, why they drafted it, why they had it, all the laws that have come about, and the course of what they have restricted and what they have done. And it's people have a right to defend yourself. That's a human right. And that was the basis of a lot of the constitutional rights. A lot of the theories at the time is you should never. And you think of it when you live in California. If you're a veteran, if you've ever been in a gunfight, you're a law-abiding citizen. Like, you can't get you go into places where you're like, holy shit! If anything cooks off, I'm so fucked. I saw a video of some guy in a convertible driving through the wrong neighborhood in LA, and a group of homeless people dragged him out and beat the shit out of him and destroyed his car. And I'm like, that sucks. Like, maybe don't showboat in your convertible by a bunch of homeless people, but also wish you had a gun, I bet.
So, Doc, you mentioned about going to visit a prison and being able and not being able to bring your gun. You said that's a reasonable restriction. Why is that a reasonable restriction?
Okay, so that's a reasonable restriction because we don't want the criminals to get the guns. Now, if you're talking about like taking
I'm
my gun,
a good guy with a gun, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that the whole argument? Isn't that the whole argument in New York City with what we're saying later? If I'm going into a bad neighborhood and I'm surrounded by criminals, that I need to be allowed to carry a gun. So why wouldn't
okay,
why wouldn't that reasoning extend to going to a prison? That's
so several
ostensibly
reasons.
full of
Number
criminals.
one, and I think this is the one you're looking, but it's not the only thing. One thing is that there are armed professionals who are detaining these individuals.
Yeah,
So there's armed professionals and all sorts of security systems and surveillance systems and everything else that don't exist other places. So that's one thing. Second thing is that you don't want the criminals to get a hold of that firearm. And I don't know a firearm. When you're going in and you're visiting a prison, let's say it has 2,200 inmates. What firearm do you carry that has 2,200 rounds? And by the way, you're going to have to, with a pistol, you're going to have to put like 6 rounds in them to even have them sit down and behave themselves. So now you need 2,200 times 6. What's that? Something like 14,000 rounds you need to carry on your person for your weapons systems, plural. Look, it's a losing. You know this. I'm being a slightly hyperbolic because I feel like your question is leading. And my point is, you walk in with a firearm, it's probably going to wind up in the criminal's hands. You may the person doing this may very well be in on it. That might be what they want. Or here's another reason: I don't want dad walking into the prison to see the rapist of his daughter and taking the law into his own hands.
Doc, thank you. You have made my argument for me. You hit on all points. You hit on, hey, there's already prisoners there. The argument from the left is, hey, we have a police force, we have a public safety force that's there to protect us. 2, the possibility of where I was saying before about like rigorous training and this and that, because we don't want, if the firearm was taken out of the person's hand and then used by the criminals. The thing on the need for the handguns, I mean, prisoners typically outnumber the security guards, 50-1, and I'm sure they're not even allowed to take a pistol when going and escorting prisoners out for just that fear. And then the other point that you raised, Doc, is someone taking, a good person like a father, seeing seeing the rapist of his daughter in prison and going, berserk, or just wanted to take revenge. This is a good guy with a gun that qualified to, to have it, but you need the argument there is that this person is acting emotionally and not, it doesn't care what the law says, that you can't murder someone even though they did this terrible thing to you. So those are my points that I've kind of illustrated before. I'm not making the argument that no one should be allowed to carry a gun. What I'm saying is that there is a balance between an individual right versus public safety.
Isn't it convenient though in the jail and or prison that the prisoners don't have firearms, right? And they don't want anybody coming in with firearms, so the prisoners get firearms so that they can be controlled. So
that's
controlled by a governmental entity.
So Brent,
I understand why a government doesn't want citizens to have firearms, so they can be controlled in their own.
And so basically, you're making the slippery slope argument that just by any amount of any restriction whatsoever in terms of where a firearm can be taken or who can have it, automatically the government is just going to ban firearms across the entire country.
No, actually, Michael, that's not what he's saying. He's saying, Michael, I believe what Brent is saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brent, he's saying you're making a false analogy or false comparison. What you're saying is society is like a prison system. And we're saying, no,
I'm not saying that. That's not the analogy I was making at all. You said, sir, hey, it's reasonable to restrict someone bringing in a gun into a prison because it's full of criminals, right? Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm saying, we all acknowledge that there's criminals in the United States that are running about, okay, haven't been caught yet, or people willing to commit crimes, especially in, high population centers such as New York City, Chicago, San Francisco, what have you, LA.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the only thing I was saying is that's the same living in those areas, which I can't remember if it was Micah or Chad. I was saying, hey, I'm making I want to carry a weapon for self-protection, which again, I don't have an issue with it. I frankly think that this decision, in terms of this, I'm sorry, what was the case? Sullivan, right?
Bruin.
Bruin. Excuse me.
Yeah. Bruin. That, the court could have made an opinion strictly as it applies to this case and not made it a larger one, saying that, he had just cause to, that his cause or his reason was viable. But essentially all I'm saying is that if you're saying that there's a reasonable restriction to not bring a firearm because there's criminals around, and I'm saying that there's areas outside of a prison where criminals are around, then shouldn't it be reasonable that a restriction could be put in place as well there?
No, I mean,
he's not wrong. But with the rapist example where we talked about, I think there is a common theme. I was listening to you guys, and I think there's a common theme. What Michael's saying is that there's like a place where someone might get a heated passion or something like that, or the courthouse makes you go through metal detectors. I was reading the opinion again. They called it sensitive areas. Political legislatures, someone that gets so upset with Roe v. Wade, or they want to go into the legislature and, there are sensitive areas. What the law in New York was just trying to do is that they were trying to say all of New York, it's a big crowded city. It's a dangerous area. And they didn't use strict scrutiny, but Brent, pull that chart up for me again. You're going to learn some of these terms and you're going to understand. God damn it. That's not him. That's Joe Biden. That's not my chart.
Hey, look, he's still on the mic.
That was on the ready deck. I have to swap him out. Sorry.
And I should reiterate, Clarence Thomas said he did not use strict scrutiny. He did not use it. He used something different. But when it's a fundamental right, the law in and of itself needs to be narrowly tailored. Oh man, where they didn't put narrowly tailored? Oh man, this is a bad chart. I should have looked at it more. So the law, the pull that one down, man. That's
we need to work on our opening statements, Micah.
Did you want me to pull it back up or what?
the law needs to be narrowly tailored, and that phrase means something. That it's directed at. I'm going to give you an example. The one time strict scrutiny, the example they give you in law school when the example of strict scrutiny was met, and it was under an equal protection argument, and there was a when you're a protected class of person, when you're either a law that discriminates on race or national origin, you have to subject that law to strict scrutiny. And there was a law in American history that on its face treated people from national origin completely differently, violated their constitutional rights, but it was narrowly tailored and it survived. And that is in World War II, when they started making rules about Japanese on the West Coast. And there was a compelling national interest security. The compelling interest was national security and preventing spies and espionage all along the coast. And at first it was a curfew. They passed rules that said Japanese citizens need to be from this neighborhood to this neighborhood, need to be in your homes. And it was like generally, I think, around military bases. You had to be in your homes and they just pushed it until they started putting them and so there's constitutional scholars that don't think that would even get upheld today. But when you're trying to expand on some sort of infringement and you're like, we established there's dangerous places like the prison. There's dangerous places like the courthouse. Schools, there's inherently, boxers. Like I was thinking as you're saying that there's, you don't ever see two boxers that have a gun on their hip. You know what I mean? Because who knows how frustrated you get. Like there's probably little places where maybe even bars, if we want to really extend it, but I don't know how the way you have to write it is so that it's narrowly tailored to get a compelling. You can't just say fucking all of New York can't have because of a compelling, because there's all kinds of compelling government interests. National security is thrown around as one of the most compelling interests ever. And there's so much shit that is done under the interest of national security, from Gitmo to people that still haven't seen the light of day and due process. I'm just saying. You have to look at the laws that you're passing, and they have to be constitutional. And just straight up telling people, and let's move on to Roe then, if everyone's ready.
Anybody got any saved rounds? We are actually almost at the hour mark, so
let's go on and move on.
I just want to touch though on the internment camps. I mean, you said due process, and obviously, the internment of the Japanese was a gross miscarriage of not even justice, just a gross miscarriage of government overstep. So sadly, it got rectified, but way too late, and it's something we weren't even taught about. I think I don't remember in history class even learning about it. Oh, you did, Doc? Really? Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, heck yeah.
No, not for me. Oklahoma public education.
You know how those Democrats like to violate rights.
You're gonna call Oklahoma Democrats? Oh man,
I'm talking about FDR.
No, that's right. I mean, look at FDR. You want to talk about unspoken, president unspoken laws. I mean, FDR, violated the unspoken rule of, president serving for 2 terms, after Washington. And then he said, in the interest of national security, I think it's best that, I run for a 3rd term. And he got elected until they passed a law saying presidents are limited to 2 terms. All right, that's going off a tangent on unspoken rules, but all right.
So no, but you were transitioning us there nicely you were talking about due process, and I would love to speak about what due process means. So when we talk about the Constitution, we talk about due process. We're talking about, and I'm gonna get to Mr. 10th Amendment over there. I can't wait to get to 10th Amendment on abortion too. So due process means one of 2 things. There is a category called procedural due process and a category called substantive due process. Procedural due process refers to the procedures by which the government, it's not really applying here. It's like they have to give you notice and hearing. If they're going to deprive you of life, liberty, or property, you need to have notice and hearing. That's just a procedural matter. It's not really what we're talking about. Substantive due process is the content of the laws the government can pass. And it's where if you're at home, you can pull up a chart. It's called the scrutiny chart, constitutional scrutiny chart. They're all over the place. But if you have a fundamental right, it has to meet the law being passed has to meet strict scrutiny. And the Bill of Rights. So I guess we'll jump into the Bill of Rights. What I found interesting is James Madison and some of the other, there was Federalists, didn't want, the Constitution's broken down like this. Let me back it up. Article 1 explains the powers of the legislature. Article 2 is the president's power. Article 3 is the judges. So there's people that were like, that's all we need. That's all we need. Then the Bill of Rights, there was debate over the Bill of Rights. And one of the arguments, the historic arguments about the Bill of Rights is that, and tell me if he wasn't spot on, that it's been objected to a Bill of Rights that by enumerating particular exceptions to the grant of power, it would disparage those rights which were not placed in enumeration. It would and it might follow by implication that those rights which were not singled out were not intended to be assigned. So people were afraid if you didn't write it down, or if you started writing down just a few rights, that it would take away others. So their response, the compromise, the way it all came together and got ratified was the 9th Amendment. Everyone's preaching the 10th Amendment, hold the fuck on. The 9th Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution, that means the spelling out. The enumeration or spelling out in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed, that means understood, to deny or disparage other rights retained by the people. So they're saying that even though we didn't list all these fundamental rights that get strict scrutiny, there are still some that are in existence. And due process, the people that keep talking about the 14th, that makes it so the states also have to follow any due process rights. Because here's what's crazy about that. The Los Angeles Police Department in the early 1900s or mid 1900s was just straight up going into people's houses and like taking shit. There was a conscience shocking case where this guy tried to eat and they were like, they force pumped his stomach to get the drugs out. They used them as no warrants or anything. And they're like, oh yeah, those warrants, that's cute. The Constitution applies to the federal government, stupid. And it wasn't until someone challenged that, they're like, no, motherfucker, the 14th makes it so you guys also have to follow these rights too. So let me talk about, fuck it, let's just go into it. So one of the first cases, Doc, you know what I love about tonight is I can bring the sex robot in. I can legitimately bring the sex robot in. One of the first cases covered a state passing a law that forbid married couples from being able to obtain contraception. Couldn't get birth control pills, couldn't get condoms, couldn't get contraception at all. The Supreme Court, now this is the privacy. Some people are saying, no, there's no fucking right. There's no right to this. The Supreme Court has established that one of your fundamental rights is a right of privacy, a right to be left alone by the government. And the rights of privacy came about by interpreting the First Amendment, the Third Amendment. Is that me or is that someone? The Third Amendment means that you don't have to quarter soldiers in your house. Like that's that people don't ever talk about or look at. You don't have to store troops in your house. The Fourth Amendment means they can't come in without a search warrant. They can't look through all your shit. You're secure in your papers. And that Ninth Amendment, where we talked about, somebody even hit it. The penumbra. I hate that word. So there is precedent. There's started, whatever you want to call it. There is an understanding that the courts can still create. So under that contraception case, they created a right to privacy. That right next got challenged by a state passed a law that prevented single people from getting contraception. That law was challenged too. The right to have children, the right to pick. There's a reason China can cap their people at 2, and we can have as many children as we want. The freedom to procreate. There are fundamental, and then so here it is, Doc. Under this freedom to do what the fuck you want and be left alone. If the government tried to pass a law forbidding people from fucking sex robots, theoretically, you have the right to be left alone from the government. It's not enumerated in the Constitution, but for the state to pass some sort of law theoretically forbidding sex robots. Now, sex robots is probably a bad example because what's fucked up. So let me tell you about the last time they rolled this back. The first time this was used was New York tried to pass a law. Oh my shit.
Hold on, Mike. Mike, take a breath, man.
New York tried to pass a law forcing minimum wage, forcing employers to pay their employees a minimum wage. And this was like early 1900s, I think, early 1900s. And someone brought a challenge to that said, even though it's not enumerated, we have a fundamental right to contract. We have a fundamental right to contract as we seem fit to contract. And that was found, that was upheld. That was the law of the land for about I can't remember when. Then hotels perish can. They cite these cases in the abortion in the law too. That rolled that right back. And then all of a sudden, I know Pepe Sylvia, dude. That's my chalkboard back there. I'm trying to my final subjects I need to study before the bar. I've been in this office way too long. So shit, where was I?
Abortion.
So the privacy rights, economic interests. Once they started rolling that back, and they realized you only have to have rational basis review. And rational basis review is almost always upheld. The government I know it's con law, it's boring as shit, but this is what it's all about, man. And these are the things you guys don't think. I tried telling you that we're getting to that boiling point. I'd say that a significant amount of pressure has been reduced since the gun decision from that boiling point of boiling over. But you're gonna see leftists doing extreme shit after this Roe decision.
Okay, what's your position on it? Because it sounds to me like, Micah, that you're actually arguing that it should be protected under privacy rights.
I'm like Justice Roberts' opinion. I read it. And so there's another principle at work called judicial restraint. And when we want to talk about Roe, the Roe case, Robert said they should have decided whether or not a woman has a right to terminate her pregnancy, and that's it. That's it. Because Roe then went on to develop a viability test. And he said that was just on so many levels, that viability, and they just did it to create a workable standard. But the viability test is essentially garbage. They went on to and I read his opinion, which caused me to read another case. I didn't even realize that there's this, what they now call archaic procedure, where they essentially vacuum during the trimester. Yeah. It's fucking reading. I don't want to know as much as I know going to law school. I don't know what a quickening is. It sounds like a horror movie, but at one point in time, there was a law about quickening or something like that. There's so much goddamn case law on this. What it is what we just said. You have a right to pick how many children you have. A woman up until a point should have, and he was saying, so he would leave Roe in place, abolish the viability rule, and rule the Mississippi law constant. And he cited medical journals that made the ease and availability of pregnancy test kits and the reliability of pregnancy test kits, where that 15 weeks was not prohibitive of a woman making a choice. Again, the other fucked up thing is I don't know enough about science, and I really don't want to get into the regulation, but we're talking about rolling back. We're talking about just doing away with the fundamental right. So it's not, and then, so what did Clarence Thomas say? His opinion was different from everybody else's. And he's like, essentially this bullshit of privacy that's not enumerated, because everyone's like, there's no enumerated right to it. He's saying this bullshit privacy because people have the right to marry. They're like, no, there's not a privacy right. So gay marriage is potentially in question. Being able to get condoms again, maybe the morning after pill in abortion. Because now states are going to pass legislation that says, can a woman even get, if Roe's overturned, the privacy rights getting rolled back, let's put it out and say a woman can't even get a fucking morning after pill. It should alarm people at a very least. And I mean, I haven't been reading the comments. Last time it was all like, Michael wants to kill baby. Like, I have legitimately no interest in infanticide. You know, like I don't. I genuinely don't. But you have to give, when it comes to family planning, or like, you can't just roll back rights and not expect repercussions to come down. These are very deliberate. They're very purposeful. And part of the judicial precedent is judicial restraint. We wouldn't have even been in this mess if they hadn't created the viability test. They should have restrained themselves to just holding the law constitutional, abolishing the viability test, and leaving things in place, because you're opening it up to roll back the rights.
Somebody quick.
I'll jump in real quick. Okay. So I'm going to speak to the pro-abortion crowd right now, because what the hell, it's a relative term. I don't know, pro-life, pro-choice, pro-abortion. Pro-abortionists. Take a line from Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade. You lost, but you don't have to like it. But what you need to do is go back into your cave and sit down and think about how you lost. And you lost because you picked your fight at the wrong time. Right now, the court is stacked with conservative judges that are pro-life. And you brought a case that worked its way up. You kept getting beat till you got to the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, and they disagreed with you. You brought your case at the wrong time. You made a strategic error. You should have waited till conditions were more favorable.
I think we have to at least agree on. I think we have to at least agree on that. Is that, you know, if it doesn't matter what the issue is, but I think the problem was the people that were pro-abortion thought that Roe v. Wade was unassailable. It was unassailable, and it could never go away. And they read the tea leaves wrong. I agree with you there, Les. I'm an anti-abortionist, but I have mixed feelings about, you know, and Micah brings up some of them, you know, privacy rights and things like this. I have mixed feelings about Roe v. Wade being struck down. But I will say this, dumb. The people who kept saying, oh, yeah, you don't agree with us? Well, we'll take it to a higher court. Well, they took it to the highest court in the land, and they lost. Dumb.
Yeah, they did. And here's some lessons they can learn along the way. You know, every time somebody questions something, if you really want to be repulsed, read about this thing called partial birth abortion. That'll make you lose lunch. And when you'd say, hey, but why don't we not do this? You'd get vitriol and anger back, but not an explanation why that's a valid method. And then when you say, hey, if a woman needs a baby removed from her for medical reason, we call it a cesarean section, and the doctor has to do it in a hospital. Why can't the abortion be done in a hospital by a doctor? Oh my God, you're against women's rights, vitriol, anger, and nastiness thrown at you. No explanation of why a non-doctor can do it. And I could go on, but every time the other side brought up this, hey, what about this? You know, vitriol, attacks, personal, oh my God, you hate women and all this. It's like, there was never any negotiation there. There was never an attempt to work out. You ended up at this place because you would take no other off-ramp. So go home, pro-abortionists, go lick your wounds and learn from your mistake.
Well, I'll speak to that part of it. I mean, we haven't gotten into the issue of it, but I guess in terms of the poor choice, as someone who is pro-choice and has friends and family that are pro-choice, I disagree in saying that pro-choice activists or those who would want to keep with pro-choice rights for women have just gone along and been thinking like, oh no, everything's fine. The Supreme Court's going to uphold the decision. You know, there's been numerous amount of cases, especially as you know, as laws in the states that further restricted abortion, and that you know, the conservative majority in the Supreme Court, you know, little by little chipped away at a women's right to choose. So Yeah, there is no doubt about that. And the second part um, is that in terms of waiting and biding your time. I mean, there these laws that gone into effect. These the Texas one was basically putting out a bounty. I mean, I know the case before was a Mississippi one, but the state started copying. Was basically putting out a bounty on women who were seeking an abortion, whether it's in state or out of state. And you want to talk about a right to privacy? Why? What business is it of mine, as one citizen to another, to sue you for you getting an abortion? And normally, to sue someone, you have to have show just cause for damage as to how you were damaged by this person seeking an abortion. So that's why um, that's why the case was taken to court, taken to appeals, and ultimately to the Supreme Court. Less, but um, I think there was a grave concern. I mean, even before, of course, like the memo being leaked of, with the Supreme Court majority of conservative justices. Um, and I don't want to cause a whole thing, but certainly I think the other part that would have been when you kind of say about, hey, you lost, like go back to your, cave or go back to your hole, whatever, and think about it. I think the other issue at hand also is like this faith in institutions. And the one thing that happened here, when the case was going by to the Supreme Court, one was of course stare decisis, right? That precedent that is set before by the Supreme Court, is going to stand. Um, and so that was one thing that we were hoping that the conservative justices on the court would recognize that, and they testified to stare decisis in their confirmation hearings. So there's that aspect. The other part being is that the way that these last three justices, certainly the more recent two, or the two before the most recent one before Barrett, um, the way that they got put on the court certainly was a lot different. And if you'll remember, Obama was president when Antonin Scalia suddenly passed away, and there was, I believe, 9 months left until the November election, and Republicans controlled the Senate, and essentially they prevented they would not take up his nomination, Merrick Garland, who's currently Attorney General of the United States. They would not take up Obama's nomination for consideration and arguments. There was no legal precedent to do that. They just blocked it entirely. And their reasoning was, um, well, there's going to be an election coming up and the people should be able to vote on it.
Well, that
That
was Chuck Schumer's time when back in the early '90s when he was blocking somebody else and he wanted 18 months. So turnabout's fair play.
no,
That's what I would say to
nothing.
that. So hey,
There's
I
were
will say
hearings denied.
that's kind of bullshit that they went in front of their judicial the congressional hearings and made it. They like even talked about. I feel like they went down the vein of privacy rights and implied rights and like yeah they didn't even like signal that this was a possibility. I think
Yeah,
that's just
and to finish the thought, that I was just saying is that also on the flip side, when it came Coney Barrett and like Trump was that the election was coming up, then they had no issue with it because they knew that it was going to be a conservative justice. So that's kind of why I mentioned the hypocrisy part. But what's terrible, what's really bad about this that's concerning is that um, this lessens Americans' faiths in our institution. You know, Trump has been doing that in terms of like our election laws and the the public servants that are set up to meet those election laws. And of course, I mean, there's always been a low opinion of Congress, but overall, like these things, when you don't believe in the court, you don't believe in the Congress, and you don't believe in the executive branch, then that's a troubling issue. And I would say we saw that in January 6th as well. Okay.
I'm not disagreeing with you, Michael. I think it was wrong for McConnell to block it because if you want to go defeat Merrick Garland, defeat him on the merits of defeating him. You know, it was wrong what they did to Merrick Garland. It was rewind a few years, it was very wrong what they did to Judge Bork. You know, both sides did it. You know, McConnell blocked him for 9 months. Earlier, Schumer was calling to block him for 18. Both sides are guilty of it. Both are wrong. You know, so the president gets to nominate who he wants for the court. It's up to the Senate to decide on the merits, you know, but to not give the guy a chance, no, that was flat out wrong, you know?
Yeah.
Flat out wrong.
There's going to be political hypocrisy regardless.
time.
I mean, we just had a big January 6th committee over, you know, the storming of the Capitol where nobody was killed other than an actual protester. There was no law enforcement killed during that whole incident. Okay.
One's died as a result of being attacked and committing suicide. So yeah, I believe 6 officers have died in total.
I don't think so.
No.
And then you had
And they were
riots in
attacked.
2020 all across the nation where people were killed as a result, and there's nothing done about that. So, you know, we can talk about the hypocrisy and all that stuff, but I want to get back on the abortion deal. And I agree, it was wrong that they didn't bring them up for a vote, but it's political war.
Micah, if I could ask you a quick question. A lot about Roe versus Wade that's brought up is all about precedent. But I'd recently saw an article that says since its inception, the Supreme Court has overturned precedent over 200 times. So it seems their only precedent is to ignore precedent. Is that number roughly true, or is that just
I don't know
about
about the
bloviating?
I don't know about the exact number, but that contracts case is an example I gave you where the right to contract was pulled back. They have done it, and I think it's dangerous when they roll back protections like that, because it's abortion now, but Clarence Thomas didn't hesitate to say there's a whole bunch of other shit we need to look at under this,
I'm glad you're calling that out.
It's privacy rights. It's
Yeah.
just, you should understand that as a whole. It doesn't mean you support infanticide or anything like that. It's privacy rights. And kind of, you know, with a little spillover, there was a few religious cases going on, and just for the general knowledge of the Constitution, the establishment clause of the Constitution makes it so the government can't prohibit the practice of your religion, but they also can't endorse. They can't endorse a religion either. So there's been a bunch of cases, and everyone wants to talk about the 10 Commandments and how that's a pain in the ass. You can't have a nativity scene, but the court said you have to have 3 different. If you have like a Christmas tree, a menorah, and a sign that says "Peace for everyone" or something, like that's acceptable on public lands. Like there's legitimately, like, you have to have a 3 thing, but the government can't endorse a religion. And I feel like with the Roe decision, like, so, okay, if we're going to go with the 15 weeks of moral, let's have a discussion about, you know, when we think life begins or whatever. And then also, does that mean we're adopting a particular political belief? And then, Michael, I think the other thing that you need to acknowledge is that women do have a fundamental right. And Roe has always said they have a fundamental right pre-viability. That it's like, it's all different now. But there was, you know, before that, within Roe and built all the other case law, there's still an interest. A government has a legitimate, if not important, interest in the future life. And that at some point in time, and they had said viability in Roe, it expands to, like, you know, and my mother-in-law brought up, in criminal statutes, if you kill a pregnant woman, you can generally get another additional charge. You can catch that, and that's case by case. But I think it's important to acknowledge that there is a point, I think, where the government has an interest. We're not just going to let a 9-month pregnant woman stab herself in the belly with a bayonet and be like, "Oh, Roe v. Wade." Like, you know, there's a distinction there. But also, on the other side of that, if you're going to say that a woman can't choose because the minute a sperm breaks the egg, fucking life, you're kind of forcing me to adopt. That's almost as if the government's adopting some sort of religious argument to a certain degree. I don't know, and it's subtle, it's nuanced, it's crazy, but the real issue is, like, you know, people have a right to fuck in the privacy. That was another privacy right. If you're gay and you want to fuck another dude in the ass, have at it. And that's not my cup of tea, but I get that. I mean, that sex robots is this hop, skip, and a jump, Doc. I'm saying, it's there. It's all that should be. You should, the Constitution doesn't have to spell it out, but we should all understand you can fuck a robot in the privacy of your own house if you want to, and the government can't pass a law infringing on that. But we just need to. You guys are there. The politicians have really pulled us apart. Michael, I know the article. I've read the article. I have liberal friends. I appreciate the liberal perspective, and we need to have an adversarial system because it's how you tease out the truth. That's why you have a prosecutor and defendant. They got to go head to head to tease out where the truth and where the facts lie.
Yeah,
and
I don't see it as a liberal perspective. I just see it as a right. But let's go to chat.
And the right for a woman, and it's the right to choose. But at what point are we saying the state can stay? And we should have been more graceful about how they did it because they have opened a can of worms with it. It's not exactly returning the right to the states as a talking point. Everyone's getting pulled apart by their particular outlets. The right are getting more far right, the left are digging in their heels. And you know what? I've heard an argument which was interesting that if they start to roll back gay marriage, if they start to do that, that really there's no one to blame but the trans community. Like they have taken shit to such in the I know it's gonna I know that that's a community that is Dave Chappelle hit on it
all
too.
Right, Micah, come on, buddy. Let's spread it around, buddy.
I'm just saying,
jump in, man. Jesus Christ.
Let me qualify. Let me qualify and clarify these points. Hold on. Let me qualify and clarify these points. And
Go ahead.
It's an interesting perspective that an undergraduate professor of mine pros, and that's like take someone that's in the civil rights era, like Al Sharpton or any one of the other black leaders that's pushing for black rights. I'm definitely not saying that there isn't room for improvement and there aren't racial disparities in society. But I'm just saying if racism ended tomorrow, then they wouldn't have a point for existence. They wouldn't be valid in society. They wouldn't be doing it. And the trans community, the left has just gone, the society knows it's a tipping point. They've hit a fucking tipping point where they push such radical left-wing ideas that this is the response they're getting. You can't, and it's good advocacy. It's spending all the money in all the right directions. It's interest groups that are doing their things, and they pushed it to a point. Where people are pushing back and being like, this is absurd. Let the hate flow.
Chad, you got the con, dude.
Micah, I bet it would be absolutely hilarious to get you drunk and listen to you go on a rant. That was.
Wait, Micah is sober?
Oh, sadly, man, I'm telling you, it's pathetic how much I have been just in this room studying. I hate it. I'm definitely going. When I was teaching at prison, I was going into prisons teaching, and I would get real excited and talk about something. The inmates are like, what you remind me of, dog? I'm like, what's that? They're like, when someone gets out of the hole. They've been in the hole for 30 days, 60 days. That's how they act, like you do. I'm like, I don't know how to respond to that.
All right, Chad, go.
All right. So, we've talked about the legal aspects. Mike has definitely provided us an education, but let's look at the societal and the scientific impacts of abortion. So I think the legal question is, does privacy trump the right to life? Conservatives say no, liberals say yes. So the abortion argument, I think, centers on when does the fetus become a separate entity? Liberals, for the most part, say at birth. Conservatives say at conception. We often hear liberals shout, my body, my choice. The alternative point of view believes that it's not just your body. There's another body in there. But believe it or not, when it comes to science, there really is no consensus when life begins. And Micah may be able to provide us on whether the courts have a definition of when life begins. But to my knowledge, there's no even consensus in law.
And that's why they said that the viability test was unworkable. They brought up those cases where you're talking about pre-birth termination where they're sucking them out. It's gnarly. And they said that so also in the past 50 years there's been studies. They did this case he cites, they did like an infanticide study when they start to determine when fetuses can to feel pain and things like that. So there has been the follow the science crowd is no longer following the science. And this is a couple times they're doing this. It's like, dude, there's some science that's come out. Pregnancy detection has certainly gotten quicker, but there's also been some science that's come out that says, you know, viability might not be when we thought viability is. Like, so if we're going to talk about something getting returned to the states, I guess you would say that is, but that's not the case. They just overturned Roe, which is a terrible decision. Like they should have, like Robert said, left a woman's right to choose at least in place, and then let states determine, you know, where that is the choice.
I absolutely disagree with you, Mike, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. But let me talk about what science says first, okay? Full disclosure, my fiance is a nurse practitioner, and I had her give me a little class on biology about when science actually says the embryo is formed, okay? So, and from having her just explain this to me, I think that actually the left and the right are both right, and they're both wrong. And let me explain. So you have fertilization that occurs, and the fertilized egg is called a zygote. It must go through several processes before it becomes an embryo. These include the forming of blastocyst, trophoblast, and finally traveling to the uterus to attach itself to a uterine wall. Only then does mitosis begin in the embryo for the purposes of forming a baby. This actually takes place 10 to 15 days. Again, sources vary because there is no consensus in science after fertilization. But the fertilized egg must go through this pre-embryonic gray area process before the embryonic cells begin the mitosis that will eventually lead to a human being. Any skipping of these steps will result in a failure to continue development. After all this, there's a lot of development over a short period of time. I've got a little graphic up. Brent, if you can pull that up for me.
Sorry, wrong one.
So, you know, a lot of development happens in a very short period of time. You know, by week 3, we see the beginnings of a brain, a spinal cord, and a heart. That's only 21 days after the embryo sets in the uterine line, the wall. By week 6, you have a heart beating on its own. So now I think conservatives are right. They say that if this process is left to its natural development, it has the potential for life. And there's some sanctity in this. The leftist view is actually more like a shotgun. It's all over the place, ranging from a few weeks to shortly before or even at birth. In some ways, they are right. You know, at birth, the baby can function without the use of the mother's body. But I would scold the leftists and say that, hey, you know, we can't really discount everything that happens before that. So being confronted with these 2 points of view, I tend personally to accept the pro-life stance with a few exceptions, which I will get into. I've struggled with this topic mainly because I'm not religious and I can't rely on religious arguments. But I think there are plenty of secular arguments on the pro-life side. One basic argument might be that it's not a very convincing argument, but a basic argument is that there is a natural biological motivation to propagate one species. Abortion contradicts this natural motivation. Another more interesting thought experiment that I like and really puts it in perspective is, hey, if we find a single-cell organism or remnants of one on Mars, did we find life? Most people would say yes. And I apply this to a human embryo. It is life. It has different genetic material and has the potential for life if left to its natural development to become a human being. Now, full disclosure, there are species, including mammals, who do commit infanticide for various reasons. However, there is no evidence that these incidents occur because the mother wanted to maintain the ease of a certain lifestyle where she could focus on herself and her career goals. We only see this in narcissistic human beings, which leads to the source of most of my dissent from the pro-choice perspective. My view on personal responsibility. This viewpoint is best articulated by Dr. Jordan Peterson in his book, 12 Rules for Life. Rule number 7, pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. And that's what abortion is. It's an attempt to avoid personal responsibility. It's an attempt to remedy, to avoid the consequences of having sex. Well, guess what? You did the crime, meaning you had sex, you will do the time. Consequences and hardship tend to build character, make better people, thus in turn create a better civilization. I say this because we are currently seeing how the lack of consequences is affecting the newest generation of kids. And this goes to the bigger picture of leftism. It seems to me that leftists want to build a society where there are no consequences. Just look at the lenient prosecutors in places like San Francisco. You commit a crime, there are no consequences. We see how this is working out in California and New York. Not too good. I believe it was Karl Marx who described the communist utopia as a place where people could lay in fields and write poetry all day. I might be incorrect on the source of that, but I do believe it was that Marx who actually said that. In other words, a world without consequences. This leads to perhaps the biggest failure of leftism and Marxism, and that is the inability to reconcile its beliefs with human nature. Again, we are seeing the societal effects of living without consequences. Now we have a lazy, entitled, narcissistic, self-absorbed generation who wants things like socialism so they don't have to work. Kids today always want to take the easy way out of everything. They want to join the Air Force or the Army instead of the Marines. Sorry, Doc, I had to get that in there. They want trophies no matter how hard they try or how little they try. They want to remain children for the rest of their lives and sit on their phones or games or consoles and do nothing all day. That's how societies how they fail. But I digress. So we often hear the question from the left, what about rape or incest or instances where the mother's life is in jeopardy? Now, rape and the mother's life is ground that I'm willing to concede. Those type of abortions are quite actually rare. The problem I have with the rape argument centers on the potential for misuse. What I mean is there is the possibility of a pregnant mother claiming rape in order to get an abortion when no rape has actually occurred. Then you have accusations ruining people's lives when they aren't warranted, false police reports being filed, and unwarranted criminal charges. And in today's Me Too era, rape can be sex that any woman regrets, even when she consented before the fact. Don't say it won't happen. Remember the mattress girl story from 2017 when a girl accused a fellow student at Columbia University of rape, which was later found to be false? What about the Duke lacrosse team in 2006? According to the FBI statistics, up to 8% of rape accusations are deemed false. Okay, that's almost 1 in 10. Just Google rape versus regret and see how prevalent the regret belief really is. It's all over the damn place. But hey, there are other solutions to rape other than killing children. Ladies, referring back to our first topic, go buy yourself a Glock and get a gun permit. He can't kill you. He can't rape you if he's dead. As for life of the mother, this is being misused too, to some extent. One thing doctors are now including in the life of the mother argument is mental health. So in other words, if mommy isn't going to be happy about giving birth, let's just kill the baby. No, I say the mother's life has to be in immediate jeopardy from a physical cause, not a mental cause, for an abortion, and these type of abortions should be investigated to ensure that is the case. Again, if having a baby is going to ruin your daily trips to the suntanning spa or take away from your career, then don't have sex. And if you do and get pregnant, tough fucking shit. Welcome to adulthood, where you must do things that you don't want to do. In the case of incest, okay, if the act was consensual, sorry, no abortion. Again, you did the crime, you will do the time. And before someone plays the socioeconomic status card that abortion rights afford poor people a better life and prevent children from growing up in poverty, let me say I don't give a shit. You don't get to kill someone just because you are poor. If you can't afford a child, don't have sex. And if you choose to have sex, you deal with the consequences. It's really that simple.
Well said, Chad. And that's why I use the term pro-abortion versus pro-choice, because the choice is a false dichotomy. Because if you assume that two consenting adults have a sexual act tonight and it results in a pregnancy, something that probably happened across America tonight, there are only 5 possible outcomes. Outcome number 1, male and female go, wow, we're going to have a kid. This is awesome. This is great. We will raise this child. It's the one we want. Outcome number 2, woman realizes she's pregnant, goes, gets an abortion, doesn't tell guy. She made a choice. He didn't get one. Outcome number 3, woman decides to have child, doesn't tell guy. That happens. Outcome, she made a choice. Guy didn't get one. Outcome number 4, woman decides to have abortion, tells guy. Guy goes, no, I want the kid. Woman has abortion. Guy's choice doesn't matter. And the last choice, number 5, woman's pregnant, tells guy, goes, I'm keeping the baby. Like, whoa, I don't want any part of this. And he gets to pay for it the next 18 years. They say it's all about choice, but funny, women aren't losing a choice because they have all the choices the way our law is currently set up.
So there's a lot to touch upon what you guys said. So with these strict abortion laws that have been put into place, and in talking about responsibility, how come there hasn't been any language in there saying that if a man gets a woman pregnant, he has to marry her? I mean, if we're talking about responsibility, right? It takes two to tango. And from, I've been seeing here on the chats, from the religious perspective of, married couples and, nuclear families. That's what we need to right America. So how come none of that's included? Or would you be in favor of that?
No,
Let me just put it to you.
absolutely not. But you do have the responsibility of taking care of your children. That's why we have things like child support in place. So, I mean, that's taken care of.
What if he's a deadbeat with no job?
Well, we have laws in place where if you fail to pay child support, you go to jail. So that's taken care of too.
Does that help the mom? Is the state going to then pick up the child support on the deadbeat husband's behalf?
Plenty of states have welfare programs and support programs and stuff like that.
Okay.
Virtually every state, including red states, do. So,
well, let me ask you this. So, I mean, obviously very concerned about this, this unborn baby being born, right? How come we don't ever see, this this plethora of support for, free prenatal care, for health care, um, for all the aspects that need to be in place for this child to be raised and be successful?
Well, you bring up a great point, Michael. And you know what? Right now, we're seeing stuff in the news where pregnancy assistance centers are getting attacked, vandalized, some cases firebombed. There's a solution. They're trying to help the people who've had this child by either giving them the stuff during the pregnancy they need, giving them the life skills, or helping them out with basics like diapers and formula, if you can find any formula these days.
Oh, I'll go you one farther, Les and Michael. I'll say that if we don't incentivize motherhood, if we don't incentivize familyhood, and no, I'm not for forcing people to get married because of pregnancy. I agree with what other people have said. Child support and shared custody is effective enough. But nonetheless, if as a society, and I don't care, every time we talk about this, someone says, he's talking about the government. No, I'm not talking about the government. I mean, it can be a factor if you want, but I prefer to keep the government out of all of this. So everything I'm going to talk about next has nothing to do with the government in my mind. And that is this. If we don't incentivize families and motherhood and parenthood, then I got news for you, America. Hope you like speaking a new language, because your birth rate is 1.7 and the least sustainable birth rate is estimated at 2.1. So you don't want any of them cans coming over the border? Guess what? They're going to be coming over the border at a rate of 1.5 million a year. And they're going to take your jobs, and they're going to marry your daughters, and they're going to groom your dogs. And you're going to like it. And you're going to speak another language. Why? Because you don't care about, I don't want to, yes, I agree with everything Chad said about prima donna little leftist women thinking that their drama is more important than a human life. Take a flying leap. But you know what? There's the other side of the story that I agree that Michael's just now bringing up. What about the men? What about all this MGTOW? What about all that crap? That woman didn't get herself pregnant. And they sit there and go, me. And I don't see any of the men standing up and taking responsibility. Little pusillanimous turds.
By the way, I'm not making that argument.
What else is interesting?
I think what surprises me most, and this is the thing, that I don't understand, that I would love to explain to me, is that, the Republicans or conservatives talk about, hey, get the government out of my life, right? Let me to my own devices. And yet on this issue, they're the exact opposite, and that's why I was kind of mentioning the term hypocrisy, right? It's like, um, in the New York case, the Supreme Court says, oh, that is a violation of your right. In the Roe v. Wade case, is an established precedent, all right, and here they are taking away rights from women, that's been around for 2 generations. So that's the part that I have a hard time understanding. And then, for those that say like, oh, like we care about these lives, this and that, you know, under Obamacare, there's a huge expansion of Medicaid, that would have covered, given health care to a lot more of America's poor. And 17 governors, Republican governors of states, refused this Medicaid. It was already approved, it had already been passed, and they refused it for no other reason than just political, not wanting to take it. There's no strings attached. It was already approved. It would have expanded Medicaid to poor people, and it was refused. So I find hypocritical this argument is like, oh, we consider life precious, and we want to help, but again, they don't go along with, with the left in terms of, hey, let's increase healthcare for the poor. Let's increase healthcare in general. If a woman wants to have a baby, she has no right to maternity leave. Businesses pay for, uh, provide healthcare for women, and if a woman wants to take maternity leave, what she has to do it under? It's under the Disability Act. It's actually considered a disability, and that's how she gets paid maternity leave. So I just, again, find it a bit, hypocritical, like, oh, the sanctity of life, when there's so many other examples of people that are actually alive, that constantly get refused the help they need.
Let me try and answer your question, and it's not going to be a pretty answer. We just don't think certain things are rights. I don't think healthcare is a right. Not at all. Nope. You don't have the right to someone else's services.
Yep. I can tell you, as an employer employing 80 people, why am I responsible for your health care?
I agree with you, Les. That's exactly my argument. Why is it that if I want to start a business, why is it that I have to also draft like a human resources thing and seek insurance? What does that have to do with me wanting to sell, freaking hamburgers off a stand or whatever? It has nothing to do
Well,
with
I
it.
can tell you
I
where
don't
it
think I
came
don't think
from.
small I think small business owners get unfairly penalized,
Yes, we do.
for having to deal with this. And that's where I think, again, like going back to the role of government when we were talking about before, is that the role of government is to keep, one, keep us safe, the public, provide for an economy, incentivize, protect the nation, the Constitution. And one of those things that helps us grow, that helps us do better as a nation, is healthcare. Just the same as having good roads and bridges that aren't going to fall apart helps the economy overall. Everyone benefits from it because it allows the travel of goods and services much easier.
Well, here's the problem with universal health care. Anybody on this panel willing to give the VA better than a D- grade?
Yeah,
That's my go-to
And that's
argument.
for a small percentage of our population that we said there. They've done this great thing. We want to honor them and do this and give them this lifelong care. And we fucked that up as a nation and stuff. And now we're going to do the same thing for everybody. Anybody think that's going to work well?
The criticisms of the VA are perfectly legitimate and absolutely should be improved. But you can also look at universal healthcare in Western European nations, and they work well there. And so also, and let me just say this, Les. Let me just say this, is that someone who has no access to healthcare would rather get access to bad healthcare than none at all.
I'll
And
concede that point right there, but I've got a lot of friends in Europe, and when they need something done, those that can afford to get their butts over here to the U.S. to get it done. You don't want to go through European healthcare.
I know we're going on for universal healthcare, but this is kind of tracking along the same thing. The proposals that have been done before is not saying like, oh, you can only use like government government employed doctors or anything like that. If you and again, no one's also suggesting that, but if you have the ability to pay for like a higher level of care, then yes, by all means, exercise that ability. But if you don't have access, if you have no way to pay, then again, being able to get access to a physician, being able to do regular checkups is is important and would be gladly taken over nothing at all.
Micah, be quiet.
I mean, it's interesting. I have given Michael's point before too. So what's interesting is now that Roe's overturned are all the decisions that came with it, because there was also a challenge brought under the Roe that it was actually, and Planned Parenthood versus Casey was really more of the standard, that you couldn't place an undue burden in the way. But and one of the cases was, can the government take a side on which one it prefers? And it was states that wouldn't fund abortions but would fund indigent mothers taking the baby to term, and that was upheld as fine. There's no issue with the state making a preference over what it was. But what's interesting, and kind of what Michael's saying, is like, what's funny about that conservative argument is they're like, yeah, pro-life will pay for the baby, and then they shit the baby out, and they're like, why don't you own your own business? Capitalism by now. What's the, and we had that criminal justice discussion where you're like, if you want to take a look at, one of the causes, we hit like children born to, single drug addicted mothers or in the way, they're broken homes, they're in abusive situations that they genuinely probably, I don't know. And I know you're like, adoption, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, we're compounding the problem in many ways. We have good intentions.
Well, yeah,
Everyone
you need
has
a
good intentions.
reform in that respect, because our legal system right now defaults to that if there's any split between the parents, everything defaults to the mother. Maybe mom's not the best caregiver every time, but there are certain states around here that mom can be literally a serious drug addicted person, and she'll still retain custody of her kids, even though dad is probably the best guy in the world.
There was some
but
Roe
that's
decisions.
all reforms that we need to make in our society. That's
Roe decisions that said that that if a woman had to get consent of her husband before the abortion, and that was an undue burden, so that got struck down, and that minor children had to seek their parents' permission to get, and that was actually struck down too. Well, it was like that they could either talk to get their parents' permission, or that was not feasible. That a judge, they could see a judge, and a judge would sign off on it. It was crazy how many decisions about abortion came splintering out of there. But what Michael's saying is not incorrect about, what do we do now that we forced, a woman to take a baby to term, even if we've paid for it. It seems like we do have some sort of, and I'm a libertarian. We shouldn't be kicking up taxes, but if we're, it doesn't seem like that's unlikely to get overturned. Because what's crazy about all these laws we're talking about? In Article 1 of the Constitution, Congress is really given two main rights that they use all of this for. The interstate commerce, they can regulate the commerce between the states, and the taxing and spending power. And with all of that, they take all these federal laws that are in existence today are based off either interstate commerce, or an inherent right, interstate commerce, or the taxing and spending power. The Obama case stands for three different things in law school, and it's still not really solidified as decided, because it was like kicked out on a procedural thing the last time it was there. But it was, you can't force states into the marketplace. It was that Medicare thing was, they were at first, I'm not sure what you were talking about, but at first state said you either participate in Medicare, or you either participate in this government healthcare thing, or we withhold all your Medicare money. And that's
the same thing that happened with, that's the drinking age of 21. That's how that came about.
I was just going to say, that's South Dakota versus Dole.
Yeah. So
that's
there's
crazy.
certainly precedent for it. But the other thing that I did want to mention also that I don't understand, there's two things, is like, one is that, like, no one wants abortions, right? Whether left or right. No one is like, oh, I just love getting abortions all the time, right? It's not an easy thing for a woman to even make that choice, um, and go through with it. And if the goal here is, of course, preventing abortions, the other things that conservatives don't seem to support is sex education, in schools, sex education, free contraceptives, anything of that nature. I remember reading in the Texas Tribune and Odessa Midland of uh, like they couldn't get a representative to just go in there and talk about sex education. Of course, this has been shown to prevent unwanted pregnancies. And when you look at states that have, um, you know, less strict laws on sex education, this and that, the teen pregnancy rate is drastically lower than in red states, and then also that there's a lower uh, uh, mortality rate, mortality rate among women. Um, the other aspect, and speaking of this law here in Texas, Brent, can you give me can I share a screen here?
I don't see you
Oh,
with anything.
sorry, wait, shoot, where's the window? Oh, right here.
I got this one ready though.
All right, am I good? All right, so I just want to play this from an OBGYN doc here in Texas.
No sound.
Oh,
Yeah, it ain't working, brother.
oh, you guys aren't getting audio?
No.
Well, shit. All right. So essentially, this is an OBGYN doc here in Texas, and the issue that she has, obviously, besides the obvious, is that the language that's written by the legislatures um, say that it's an abortion can only be done when a woman's life is in danger, something to that effect. Essentially, that the language is very vague and not specific as to when an abortion is allowed. So that puts the onus then on the doctor, or leaves it essentially up for debate as to like what could be construed as when a woman's life could lead to danger. And essentially, you having non-doctors legislate as to how a doctor should, um, uh, operate, like, present their medical care. And I understand that we have medical boards, and I understand that we have laws in that, but that is, within the medical board community. So it's kind of, I kind of find it analogous to, like, if you got to get something fixed on your car, you know, are you going to take it to your dentist for an opinion on what's wrong with it? Are you going to take it to your state legislature to ask them what's wrong with it? No, like, you're going to go to the mechanic that you trust to have it fixed. And I think that's, again, this is just uh, extreme government overreach. And as a as a conservative on that aspect, I'd feel like that's pretty obvious.
Hey guys, we got about 10 mics left until we hit the 2-hour mark, so I do want to start wrapping her up. So I'm going to go around the horn, starting with Les, and then you guys can say your final pieces, and then we'll close this out for tonight. So Les, you got it.
Well, these two decisions from the Supreme Court are controversial, to say the least. One of the things I'm happy to report, while there have been some civil unrest around the country over Roe versus Wade, it's far less than a lot of people predicted, and I'm glad that cooler heads are prevailing. I do agree with Micah that a 2A decision and the Rhodes decision coming out close to each other probably worked out to be a pretty good pressure relief valve.
Yeah. So again, I find these two decisions to be, in terms of how they're reached, hypocritical of one another. One thing that that Micah that I'm glad that he touched on in Clarence Thomas's consenting opinion, saying that this privacy where these decisions on gay marriage, right to contraception are also up for debate, is extremely troublesome. And I can see these rights further being taken away. And if you believe that all Americans are determined to have equal protection under the law, regardless of race, sex, ethnicity, and sexuality or sexual bias, then you should be troubled as well. And I would encourage everyone to let their congressperson and their senator know about that. The one thing that I find that Clarence Thomas, he says like, oh well, there wasn't. He says that there was a withstanding like in the historical law that didn't exist for the right to an abortion. But if you were to, and that if there was, then maybe perhaps the ruling wouldn't be the same. Throwing out stare decisis. Um, well, if that's the case, I think there's some other laws that you would need to throw out, and that would be like Loving versus Virginia, which declared anti-miscegenation laws to be illegal. So maybe Clarence Thomas, wants to divorce Ginny Thomas, who's white, and but doesn't want to go through all the trouble and just put in anti-miscegenation laws back into effect. Um, Maybe that's his ulterior motive this entire time. So, thank you.
All right. Well, Michael, you must not have got the memo. Hypocrisy is okay as long as it's from the right. Just kidding. Or am I? Anyway, first of all, yay gun rights and screw gun control, but I'm under no illusions that New York and other deep blue states are redeemable. I'm not going to hold my breath. Secondly, with regard to abortion, hey, it's a great question. When does your right to life begin? It's a conversation worth having. I do know that I don't want to live in a world without personal responsibility. Outside of being unrealistic and a childish way of looking at the world, kind of the view that I can do whatever I want without consequences, that would be a dystopian nightmare for me. When it comes to abortion, if you don't want a child, then the answer is simple. Don't have sex. And if you do, make sure it's with a sex robot. Look, there are solutions to this issue. Contraceptives are available. Condoms are available. For Christ's sakes, you can masturbate. And hey, if you have no self-control and can't wait to have sex, there are other holes you can stick it in that will most likely not result in pregnancy. Bottom line, you don't get to kill babies for your personal convenience.
Man, I always appreciate coming on here. There's just so much to digest. I think overall the Supreme Court is shooting about 70-80% right now. It's a human institution, democracy's messy, et cetera, et cetera. I said it. I mean, people. There's valid points on each side. People need to understand, because we understand what you believe. We talked. Michael hit on it. He's not wrong about levels of hypocrisy that are being exercised. When it's your side, being able to objectively look at something is important. It's absolutely important, and being able to decide for yourself. I don't know, and understand your rights. The Constitution is really important. And I'm glad that the decisions, like I said, 70-80% agree with the decisions. And I think democracy will live on for another day. And the left should probably dial it back a little.
Okay, yay, I like guns. And for me, the gun issue is inextricably intertwined with self-defense. And that is inextricably intertwined with the human right to life. So that's a big win. Not as big as I wish, but a big win. I agree with the comment that I think the Supreme Court's hitting the 70-80%. It's not perfect. Neither one of these rulings for me was perfect. But hey, it's on an even keel. It's definitely a good thing both ways. I got to say to Michael, just real quick, he was talking about sex education. I agree. We need to do so much more for sex education. I do want to give one more. I know we talked about it a lot, but one more plug for sex robots, because who doesn't want to be educated by those lovely ladies, sex robots? All right. On the abortion issue, a little more to say, and that is that, number one, I'm not pro-life. I'm not pro-life. I'm not pro-life. I'm Roman Catholic. I'm not pro-life. Okay? I can't be pro-life. First off, I'm for self-defense. I'm for capital punishment. I joined the United States Army and fought in 2 wars. I mean, no, I'm not pro-life. I'm not claiming that. I am anti-abortion. Anti-abortion. Okay? Not anti-choice. I'm anti-abortion. Why? Well, abortion is murder. Look, it just comes down to that. There's this thing growing inside of you that meets all the checkpoints. Life. A moss on a distant planet would get recognized as the same life. So it's life. It's inside of a human. It's human life. We know this, as we've already discussed. When the mother is murdered, the murderer, pregnant mother, is often charged with 2 murders. The mother and her fetus carried inside of her. So it's murder. That's all it ever was. Roe v. Wade got overturned. Don't care. Don't really care. Not going to shed any tears over this. But I have mixed feelings about it. First, because of what's already been discussed here. It is problematic because this is, the way it was done is what can be described as government overreach. And that is upsetting to me. But it's no skin off my nose that people that want to kill their own kids can't kill their kids anymore. Yeah, because it comes down to this. Stop killing kids. Stop killing kids. I guess the thing for me that Roe v. Wade never measured one way or another for me, because I solved this in the kitchen table. And I'm not telling you what to do in the same way that I don't want you to tell me what to do. So how I solved it in my family, what worked for me was to get my family around the kitchen table more than once and simply to say to my wife, to my daughters, to my family, any child of yours is going to be loved. It's going to be born into love. And we, the Larsons, don't kill our families. We don't do that. Right? We love them. We love them before they're born. We love them after they're born. And you will never disappoint me by bringing life into this world. So that was the kitchen table solution. And as you can see, Roe v. Wade just doesn't even factor in. So whether it stayed or whether it went away, I don't care. Last thoughts about this, though. This is where it's really, I have to tread water carefully. Listen to what I'm saying. To my knowledge, and I know there's the rare exception, but that's rare, abortionists killed their own families. Abortionists killed future abortionists. So overturning Roe v. Wade stopped abortionists from killing abortionists.
All right, so my final thoughts. I look at both Supreme Court, these particular ones that we've discussed tonight, as wins for the country. Second Amendment all the way, guys. Unregulated. The more Second Amendment wins we have, the better, in my opinion. As far as abortion, it's never really been my number one issue. I think it's just one side of the house looks at, hey, it's murder, regardless of how you look at it, and the other side of the house wants to put time limits on it, and you're never going to convince somebody that looks at it as murder on going the other way. So it's a dividing issue. I personally agree with the Supreme Court and the way they've ruled, and it's gone back to the states, guys. The way it's intended to be. Okay, if you live in blue states and that's the way you think, God damn it, live in those freaking states. All right, if you're more right inclined, live in the right wing states. I don't see how that's a loss, but it is. If abortion is your number one issue, it's kind of a double-edged sword there, because these more pro-abortion states, what what timetable are they going to assign to that? All right. What weeks span are they going to assign to how far an abortion could go? So, you might be very anti-abortion living in a red state, and then looking across the border into a deep blue state that might allow abortions, up to just before childbirth. You can be able to stomach that. So it is somewhat of a double-edged sword there. But overall, my opinion is I'm pretty content with the recent Supreme Court rulings. So I think it's been a lively discussion tonight. I appreciate everybody coming on. This is not these discussions here are not meant to be an echo chamber. That's why I specifically reach out to these individuals that I know will bring different perspectives. And I want to point out that every single person on this panel tonight served the United States honorably in the United States military, and every single person on this panel tonight went overseas to fight the good fight. So I can respect their opinions, although I may disagree with some of them. So that's it, guys. It's been a good discussion. I appreciate everybody tuning in tonight and commenting. And until next time, thanks for watching.